Hello, everyone. Welcome to Niaz, a special transmission on a very important topic and something that has haunted Pakistanis living both at home and abroad for many days now. And that happens to be the tragic incident in Sialkot um, a week ago, where Sri Lankan national was lynched to death by factory workers on the alleged charges of blasphemy. And I'm joined by Ejaz Haider, who needs no introduction, and Dr. Ilhan Nyaz, a historian whom all of you know, and you've seen him here on Niaz as well. We are going to discuss the incident itself, its ramifications, its historical genesis, as well as what can be done in the future and what roles different parts of the state and society are playing in order to address this very important issue. Ejaz Haider was in Sialkot a few days ago, working on a story, doing some investigation, and we'll have his first-hand account of what he saw, what he spoke to the different actors on the ground. And so we'll start with you, Ejaz Saab. Let us know about your visit to Sialkot and what you observed, and then we'll ask Dr. Ilhan Nyaz to jump in. Over to you.
Right.
Jaz.
Yeah, so Ilhan is not just a historian, he is also a very young professor, which obviously goes to his credit, well deserved. Sialkot, now we know that this is not the first time someone has been lynched. And a few years ago, there was a Christian couple in Kasur, and they were thrown into a brick kiln. They were burnt alive. So, and there have been other such incidents also. But to the best of my knowledge, this is unfortunately, this incident involved a foreign national. We have seen this in a racist framework. We have seen these incidents in India with reference to African nationals. But as I said, to the best of my knowledge, never before has a foreign national been targeted on the basis of blasphemy, which is, and I use this as an omnibus term for a number of perceived or real transgressions involving the various aspects of blasphemy laws. So, as we know, it nearly created a diplomatic crisis because Sri Lanka and Pakistan have always been very close. We have cooperation across multiple sectors, including defense. So this was, and I'm not saying that if it was some other foreign national with which state Pakistan was not that friendly, all I'm saying is that that kind of further complicated the issue. So I was in conversation with the district police officer, a very fine officer, Omar Saeed. He's the senior superintendent police. And I was also struck because I was, exchanging messages with him. I was also struck by the alacrity with which the police acted. So I thought, given the motorway now between Lahore and Sialkot, which has cut down the travel time by more than 2 hours, so I thought, let's go to Sialkot. Let's be on the ground and see what has happened. So anyway, I went there. I spoke with Omar Saeed. I went to Rajko Industries, which is, on the Sialkot Wazirabad road, which is a highway. Went and saw the factory, went to the spot, unfortunate spot where Priyanka Kumara was lynched. Then they dragged his body down, took him outside on the highway, burnt him. So the entire highway was blocked. And the incident happened, and I've seen the timestamp on the CCTV footage. The incident happened by 11:05, and this was last Friday. This was a Friday before last Friday. So I was there 1 week after the incident. So 11:05, 11:26, police got the first call that something has happened. And the first party reached there in about 15 minutes. And then the second party, which was led by the DPO himself, reached there. And the DPO, because the road was blocked, he had to actually walk 20 minutes to the factory. So the first thing they needed to do after, because, the Sri Lankan had already been lynched and burned. So the first requirement was to ensure that this charged crowd the numbers do not increase. They do not actually vandalize the factory. They do not try and kill some other people in the management. And then they also reached out through other organs of the state, reached out to certain religious bodies, Sunni Tariq, TLP, to ensure that there's no supportive statement from these bodies, which could further complicate the issue. Mm-hmm. They reached out to the lawyers' body in Sialkot and got them to issue a condemnatory statement. They reached out to other civic bodies. So they were checking these boxes because, normally police forces would not be required to do that. Their main job would be forensics, CSI, further investigations, tracing, tracking, and arresting the culprits, and then making a watertight prosecution case. But given the nature, and I think that's where Ilhan will bring his insights, given the nature of this, there are a number of other things the police has to do in order to make sure that you do not allow this to spread, because it has a force multiplier kind of effect. And also to ensure, after they had actually arrested the culprits, that no footage comes out of these people reciting the Quran or praying, and for elements outside to actually sacralize this entire thing, which becomes a major problem when you're dealing with such incidents. And I was also, in addition to, of course, since I was talking to Umar Said, but I also wanted to speak with police officers from the provincial cadre. And I was talking to constables and sub-inspectors and all that. And I wanted to get a sense of how they were looking at it. I was pleasantly surprised to see that they considered it a blot on Pakistan's image. As a matter of fact, the spot on the rooftop where I stood, and I took a picture of the spot where he was killed because it was still blood-stained, dried blood. And I said, my God, look at this. I mean, this atrocity. And this SI who was standing next to me said to me, Sir, ye hamare mathe par lag gaya. So this is now a blot on our forehead. Similar sentiments were expressed by other police officers. Which was, as I said, I was pleasantly surprised, and I also felt that the law enforcement personnel, at least, and I'm not saying this is a scientific sample, but what I'm saying is that the people that I spoke with made clear to me that they looked at what they were doing in terms of investigating the issue as a professional force, and they were not being weighed down by any ideological considerations. So this is, briefly, what I saw there and what I think was important. And as far as the entire sort of framework of social terrorism is concerned, of course, Ilhan has his views, and I know them because I shared those views with him, and I've quoted him in my piece.
Okay. So we'll go to Ilhan, and before we do that, I think the role of police, and especially what happened, Ejaz, to the police force during the recent two big standoffs between the TLP and the police. I mean, I think the Punjab police has acted bravely. I mean, the kind of violence that was unleashed on them, so many injured and so many killed. I mean, the numbers are mind-boggling. But anyway, I mean, and we must praise those who actually stand up. I mean, it's a senior political level, decisions that sometimes let them down. But anyway, Ilhan, over to you. And as Ejaz said, your your take on this issue and what he's quoted and how he's quoted you in his piece.
Now, I think that this particular incident is, of course, the first instance where we have had a foreigner actually killed in the course of a lynching that is inspired by allegations of blasphemy. But at the same time, this is not the first time that foreigners or foreign interests have been targeted on this issue. So you can go back to the issue of Salman Rushdie and the satanic verses. You can also look at the way in which the TLP was targeting the French ambassador in particular for expulsion from Pakistan as one of the major demands in their dharna. So I think that in some ways, what you are going to see is that there is going to be a lot more targeting of foreigners or foreign interests by such elements whenever a target of opportunity or intent comes up before them. The broader problems, of course, that this indicates is that for a long time now, ordinary Pakistanis have had a sense that they exist at the sufferance of these elements, and that at any given point in time, anybody can be accused of something. It can be something innocuous, you know, an offhand remark, a comment, a wrong gesture even, and then everything just sort of blows up around them. And this is a very, very serious problem, because when the state even responds to it, so if you look at the ISPR response to this incident, or you look at the Prime Minister's response to this incident, they seem to frame it in the context of people taking the law into their own hands. They tend to frame it in the context of vigilantism. And the question that then, of course, arises is that, well, what about the underlying legal framework that is effectively giving a green light to this kind of lynching, to this kind of militant obscurantism directed at foreigners, but also directed primarily towards other Pakistanis? And that is, I'm afraid, the conversation that our political class and our military leadership and other major stakeholders are perhaps too afraid to rely upon. They're too afraid to engage with. And we have a very, very long history in our country, unfortunately, of political leaders who obviously do not share the lifestyle preferences of the clerical elite or the clerical class or those of that worldview, but who are more than happy to bank upon reactionary forces for short-term political gain. And even if that means sacrificing your own police officials, as was done recently in the context of the protests in the Punjab, what we see is that there is a complete failure on that side. And I really don't see much by way of hope for improvement, because once such a social force is unleashed in a society, putting it down requires a lot of energy and a lot of strength, because this kind of behavior draws upon a wide amount of social acceptability, political acceptability in the society itself. So it really is a very, very difficult situation to deal with. In that sense, I'll agree with Ejaz in that when he points out that this challenge is not like the TTP challenge, where you can actually isolate the militants and fight them in the kinetic sense of the term. This is more of a civilizational challenge. This is more of a mass psychological challenge. And the tools that you need to overturn this type of thinking are not things that you can do in the short term. It requires an overhaul of the legal framework. It requires massive investments in opportunities for the disenfranchised, disenchanted youth that is increasingly drawn towards this kind of outpouring of violence. And it also requires mass investments in education and in opportunities. So the problem is that there is no easy solution. And our political and economic elites, obsessed as they are by the value of the rupee every day and the current account deficit every day and how much cheese we are importing every day, they are not really engaged with the underlying challenge that this thing represents. So I'm afraid that we are at the beginning of a very long and a very dark journey. And you're going to see a lot more of these incidents in the years ahead.
Ilhan, thank you so much. And I totally agree with you. As you know, I've already bought your thesis a long time ago. In fact, I wrote about it as well. And I think the important issue to highlight here is the ideological challenge that this entire process posits. And unfortunately, you mentioned the political class and the political elites. Frankly, they do not have a solution or any clue as to how to address this. Because if you remember in April, when the first round of violence between the police and TLP workers occurred, and then there was an agreement to take the issue of French ambassador to the parliament. When that particular session occurred, I mean, I was horrified to see that every political party tried to outdo each other, saying we have done more for the cause of TLP. So the Pakistan People's Party's former prime minister, who and PPP happens to be more on the liberal sort of side, and he said, well, I'll translate that, by the grace of God, we in 1974 fixed the Qadiani problem, and then the PMLN representative came and said, we made the blasphemy law even stronger. And then the PTI guy said, well, we are doing this, that, and the other. So everybody's playing along the same pitch. So, I mean, there's no challenge. So, Ejaz, based on what Ilhan's prognosis and he's also diagnosed, the legal system, the education, the political class. I mean, it could also turn into a big national security threat at some point. I mean, if this is not arrested or challenged. So I would like you to elaborate a little more on that, I mean, how should the state, in particular, the political and the military elite, be handling this? I mean, unfortunately, what the latest secret agreement shows, that there's a measure of course, pragmatism, short-term, band-aid solution, but also a kind of a capitulation. I mean, many people are seeing it that way. Zahid Hussain wrote in Dawn, for example. You have been very critical of that as well. Many others. So how should they be? I mean, what should be Rawalpindi and Islamabad thinking at this particular juncture of our history?
Absolutely. So interestingly, I've written this piece for Dawn magazine, which will appear on Sunday, which looks at this as a national security threat. I have also mentioned that the TTP is, of course, a threat. It can generate violence. It retains the capacity to do so. But we have managed two important prerequisites with reference to generating counter violence against TTP. One is, of course, the fact that we have been able to isolate them. They are also on the periphery. They are not in urban and peri-urban areas of Punjab. Secondly, we have a public buy-in with reference to the TTP. As we can see yesterday on the social media, the APS atrocity and how those parents are obviously and rightly opposed to any negotiations with the TTP. So it's a different case. It is a threat, but it is a threat that the state, over a period of time, after a lot of punishment, has been able to develop the capacity to deal with. How do you deal with average Joes and Janes within your society? The people who lynched Priyanka Kumara were workers. These are people who come to a factory work 9 to 5, and make some basic wage. So they are not quote unquote terrorists in the sense of the kind, when we talk about terrorism with respect to TTP or with respect to BRAS, which is a conglomerate of the Baloch terrorists, 4 Baloch terrorist organizations, or ISK. These are average Pakistanis. And so that is one problem. How many of them you can kill? So every time, and Ilhan mentioned this, and you mentioned this, these secret agreements with TLP, if you look at the trajectory, every time the TLP decided to march on Islamabad, the government or the functionaries of the government decided to kick the can down the road. And basically starting with, and that was the original sin, since Ilhan talked about the French ambassador's issue, that they said, we'll take this to Parliament. I mean, no one at that point negotiating from the government side said, look, this is off the table. There are other demands that we can perhaps look into, but this is off the table because this is a completely different dimension. However, if we allow the situation to go further south, and it will, I agree with Ilhan, it's going to be a dark journey. I hope to God that he's absolutely wrong, and so am I on this, because there are certain prognoses that one doesn't want to come true. But this is a problem. You have said, and very rightly said, that every party was trying to outdo the other in terms of saying, oh, we did this. That has to stop. That has to stop. ISPR does not need to put out news of Mehfil Milad. What does it indicate? Are you saying that we are more pious? I mean, when it comes to playing on the piety pitch, no one can outdo the religio-political parties or groups. That's not a pitch you want to play on. Omar Saeed said something very interesting to me also, and he's stated it this on record also, talking to the media during briefings. A question has constantly been asked, did blasphemy occur at the factory? He said, that is not my job to determine or decide. My job as a police officer is that a crime has been committed, and I am going to do my professional work with respect to building the prosecution's case. Now, look at the nuance, diabolical nuance contained in this question of whether blasphemy has occurred. Because this question's hidden assumption is that if it has actually happened, if it is not perceived, then the mob was perhaps right in deciding the fate of the victim. And I think that is something which, Ilhan was talking about when earlier we talked about this issue, and what became the basis for my article for South Asian Voices. He talked about the Jim Crow laws and how in the post-Reconstruction United States, most people consider those laws to have been laws that segregated the Black population. Most people do not, and I'm talking about the Americans, do not realize that there were thousands of lynchings. And as I have quoted Ilhan in the piece, that it's about crossing an imaginary line. You don't know. The Vic doesn't know what that imaginary line is. And the perps decide that imaginary line on the basis of their own interpretation, which can be guided by various factors at a particular point in time. So a Black man brushes past a white woman and he's lynched. Priyantha Kumara takes down a poster and he's lynched. And I can tell you, I saw that notice board. There are these stickers. Some stickers say, Ya Hussain. There are some stickers that say, Agar aapne aaj darood nahi padha, to zarur pad le. Now, if you take down that sticker, then from the basis of darood, as something in honor of the Prophet, peace be upon him, you can extrapolate from there and say that the Prophet has been disrespected. And so there is, so deeply ironically and diabolically, are the mob's interpretation of blasphemy is now contained in the blasphemy laws themselves, notwithstanding the fact that Ziaul Haq, those blasphemy laws, 1980 and 1986. So yes, this is a national security. We are likely to see that holistic response.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ejaz. Ilhan, we shall conclude with your wise words. Ejaz has mentioned the national security threat, and you also mentioned the wide-ranging, long-term institutional reforms, if I may say so, to address this problem. But looking at the histories of our region and places elsewhere in the world, how have societies tackled such a challenge?
Well, I mean, in many cases, they have not been able to tackle it, or they've tackled it, but only partially. There are, in essence, two ways in which you can go about meeting a problem of this socially rooted, socially acceptable violence against marginalized groups or outsiders. One is that, of course, you have a very strong, ruthless sort of enforcement from above, and the elites basically decide that this is not acceptable, and however many people we have to imprison, whatever we have to do, we just have to do it. And if there is a blood price to be paid, it will be paid until the problem is solved. So there is, one way to go about it. This is, let's say, how the Algerian leaders dealt with their problem as they saw it of the Islamists coming to power through electoral means. The other way, which is, let's say, what happened in the United States, was that there is a prolonged mass movement that gradually delegitimizes the discriminatory legal and social framework and creates a condition where the majority of people, or at least a sizable plurality of people, even in those areas where these laws are strongly rooted, come to disassociate themselves from them and come to feel a repugnance towards them. And they gradually shift their view in favor of greater inclusion or greater tolerance. This is, of course, what happened in the United States with the context of the civil rights movement culminating in various acts in the mid-1960s. But it did not, of course, completely eradicate the problem. In some ways, it displaced it to other forms of discrimination and violence against minorities, and especially African Americans. So there are no perfect solutions to this. One of the things, of course, is that when we talk about, national security, I mean, it seems that, in Pakistan, everything is a problem of national security. Whether it is your failures to deliver quality education, or the current condition of the economy, or the upsurge in this sort of social militancy and terrorism. So I would basically think that if we have this problem and we frame it as a problem of national security, then we need to maybe consider it not in the sense of a problem that can be technically resolved through the application of maybe force, but as something that actually needs to be considered far more holistically. And that is something which, unfortunately, Pakistan's military leaders and political leaders have shown an inability to do on practically all issues. So, all of our problems are into a national security problems, whether it's our economy or whatever, but we don't seem to be able to get a handle on them. So I would be a little bit cautious in that sense about framing this as a national security problem as well. But certainly it is a problem that has national security implications and is rife with the potential for massive amounts of diplomatic embarrassment and foreign policy embarrassment for Pakistan going forward. And it is, ideal ideal material for anyone who wants to harm Pakistan's image internationally to be able to pick up these incidents. And as long as they are happening, and if they happen with greater frequency in the future, then we will have to figure out some sort of response to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ilhan, and thank you, Ejaz, for sharing your insights and field notes, if I may say so. And I think, Ilhan, the different parts that you have mentioned, and in particular, the contestation of the national security idea merits a separate discussion, so whether it's water, economy, or radicalization. I mean, and let's do it soon, and let's unpack what radicalization and de-radicalization would mean in 2021 for Pakistan. But suffice it to say, Sialkot incident has been an embarrassment, and it is a very shocking reminder of what we have done to our young people. And the sooner we wake up and sooner we act, the better it would be in the interest of the country and it's the millions of young people who are seeking a better future. So with that, I thank you again, and hopefully we shall have you back.